Welcome to the garage. I'm Robert, and this is Haslip Cycleworks. If you've been following our social media posts, you know we picked up a motor for Project Mini Trike. Of course, it's a Predator 212 from Harbor Freight. It is the Hemi version, but it is not going to stay stock. So while we wait for the parts to come in to build our motor, let's go ahead and get it up on the workbench and let's pull all the stock parts off that we're not going to use. If you haven't guessed by now, we're going to turn the wick up on this to at least 11. This mini trike is not going to be a joke. You'll see the parts that we put into it, but let's get cracking and start tearing the motor apart, getting it ready for the new parts. Here we go. So as you can see, just a bone stock 212, fresh out of the box. Haven't tried to fire it up or anything like that. Because we're going to be going internal on this, we don't want to be creating a mess that we're going to have to clean up. So I covered the table in some foil and some painter's tape, and that's simply to keep any oil or anything that we may spill from dripping through the table and onto the floor. Also keeps any little fasteners or anything that come out, the little pieces, from dropping through those holes, hitting the floor, and never being found again. So first thing we're going to do is we've got it on the edge of the table. What we're going to do is put a catch can under this bad boy, and we're going to go ahead and crack this open. That way if there's any oil in here from the factory, we can go ahead and drain that out without making a huge mess. And we'll go ahead and open up the dipstick too, so that there's no vacuum created inside the crankcase. Should help everything roll out a little bit easier. And we'll just let that drain until it's all out. I think we've about got everything out. There's not much in there from the factory, but I don't know if the camera's going to pick this up, but that's got some grit in it. So anytime you buy one of these motors, first thing you do, drain the oil that's in it, flush it out, and put clean oil in it. Do not run it with the oil that comes in this. We're going to go ahead and wipe that surface off and put our drain plug back in. Now I will tell you, we're not going to use the stock Predator gas tank, so we're going to go ahead and take that off and get it out of the way. We want this thing stripped out as much as possible. Once we take these two bolts off, or these two nuts off these two studs, we can take the hose off, and then there's one more bolt on the back side between the carburetor and muffler and the gas tank. So as you can see, we've got the gas tank off. And any hardware you take off, just go ahead and put it back where it came from. That way you can keep track of it and you don't lose anything. Then you're not sitting there trying to reassemble your motor, wondering where all these extra parts came from. Now, because this was a factory fresh out of the box motor, there was no fuel in it, so we didn't have to worry about any spills or anything. Also went ahead and took the exhaust, the muffler and manifold off, just two nuts. Take those off and then just put them back on the studs so you don't lose them. So now we're going to turn our attention to this giant air box and carburetor. In hindsight, this would be better and easier with a socket. So we're also not going to use our carburetor, so we're going to pull that off. We're also going to pull this throttle mechanism off, and this governor arm. So we've removed our carburetor, the gaskets that go with it, the nuts and bolts, the springs, the governor arm, the throttle mechanism, and the plastic spacer. Hold on to all these parts. These springs and everything could come in handy later on, so we're going to hold on to those. There's the muffler removed, and our air filter, our gas tank, and the carb cover. This is what we're looking like so far. Looking way better already. And we haven't even put new parts on it yet, so rather excited to see what this thing does, the parts we're going to throw at it. So I'm going to keep going and get it stripped down. Because we're also going to be swapping the carb on this motor, we need to take these really long studs out. The best way to do that is using the nuts that came on the studs, and I added 2 washers because these are grooved shoulder nuts, so they bite into each other. What you do is you tighten them up against each other as tight as you can, and then put a wrench on this back one and just rotate it out. You'll feel it break loose, and then the stud itself starts to back out. And once you feel like it's about finger tight, you go ahead and loosen these 2 nuts away from each other, and then do the same thing on that stud. Now on this motor, this isn't a necessary step, but if you get in the habit of rebuilding stuff, mark it so we know that this is on the intake side. And then we know that this is on the exhaust side. It's just a good habit to get into. Pull our push rods out. And then we're going to pull our head bolts out. And there's the head. Oh, look. It's a good thing we pulled this off and took a look. Got a couple nicks in it. Might need to see if that needs to be addressed. Other than that, looks good. Head gasket's intact. Piston's pointing the right way. Everything looks good. Got it off in one piece, mostly because it hasn't been run yet. Got a little bit of shmoo here. We'll get that off. We'll probably run a different head gasket anyway, but hold on to this. You could use this later on. So now that we've got our head off, top of the motor is completely disassembled. We're going to leave the valve train in the head still, just because that's a lot of parts to keep track of. And as it sits, that's easier to manage. Now we're going to go ahead and get this side cover off. just in case there's some residual oil in here, I've got my catch can ready to catch anything that may come out. And if anyone's wondering why I use a socket, it's easier on my hands. My hands tend to cramp up when I'm working with these small fasteners. So for you young guys, something to look forward to when you get older. For us older guys, you probably know this trick. It's just easier to turn this. It's a lot bigger round than one of these fasteners. So we got all of our bolts out. I'm going to go ahead and take this zip tie off that's holding our key in. Alright, let's take this cover off and see what it looks like. There's a gasket in here, so I'm trying to be careful. And there goes some oil. Now there are dowel pins that align this cover, so you do have to pull straight out. Otherwise it will bind. Watch that gasket. If you can save the gaskets, you're better off. And we tore one of the edges. That's okay. Alright, let's see if you guys can see this, what I was talking about with the oil. Doesn't look very clean. You look down in there, see that dark gray? That's grit from the manufacturing process. You do not want to run your motor with that in it. Unfortunately, we were not able to save that gasket. As you can see, it did tear. Came off in a couple spots. That's normal with these paper gaskets. They're a one-time use gasket. And that's the stuff I was talking about that you do not want in your motor. So we're going to go ahead and pull our cam and our crank out. Before we can pull the crank out, we're going to have to remove the connecting rod that goes to the piston. Otherwise, it's not going to slide out. But we should, since we've got our valve train out, we should be able to pull the cam straight out. There's our cam. Stock 212 cam. Now that we've got the cam out of the way, we can pull our tappets out. That's that. And now we've got access to our connecting rod bolts. I'm going to go ahead and break those loose and pull the bottom of that cap off. Now you'll find that these are not that tight. They are torqued to a certain spec. And when we put this back together, we'll talk about that, but it's in inch-pounds, so it's not a lot. And then we've got our rod bolts out. And separate the lower rod cap. And this is why a lot of guys replace these. There is no bearing. That's just bare aluminum. It's polished, so there's no bearing for it to ride on. And this is just cast aluminum. So these oil dippers, flingers, whatever you want to call them, are subject to snapping off at high RPMs. That's why the billet rod is always a good choice if you're removing the governor. We can push our piston up the bore. Ooh. Wow, the camera even spun around the right way. That was perfect. Stock piston and rod. As you can see, the stock rod is a cast piece, prone to failure. Piston looks pretty good. Now that all that is out of the way, I'm going to take the nut off the back of the crank. And I left that on to keep from damaging the threads on the snout of the crank. Now we should be able to pull the crank straight out. Set that aside. And now we gotta take the stuff out that it's really just gonna get in the way. We need to take our governor and governor arm out, a low pressure switch, low oil pressure switch. And I think that's it. And then we'll have a bare block to play with. And then we should just be able to drive the pin that the governor gear sits on straight through. And you always want to make sure you get this washer out, because it would suck to put nice parts in this motor. You forget this, it falls in there and chews your motor up in a matter of seconds. And that's that for the governor. Now we've got to get rid of this guy. And well, that's the bare block. Ready for some aftermarket parts. Just so you guys have a better understanding, this is the exploded view of your Predator 212. Once you get it all blown apart. Pretty cool. Well guys, I didn't know that this video would be as long as it was with just the breakdown until I started editing it and got it all rendered. So I'm going to add this to the tail end of it. What we're going to do is, this was the complete breakdown of the Predator 212 to get it ready for the parts that we're going to put in it. So we'll break this up. This first part was just a teardown to prep for the parts. And in the next video, which will come out next week, I'll reveal all the parts we're going to put in it and we're going to put it together. So out of respect for y'all's time and not making a 45 to an hour long video, I'm going to break this up into 2 parts. So that's it for part 1. And make sure you're subscribed and hit the little bell notification so that you know when there's a new episode out. And in the next video, we're going to be throwing some sweet parts into this thing. That's it for today, guys. Until next time, get up, get out there and do it.